Hi, I'm Kaelen, and my brother-in-law erased my final project. Months of work, gone in a click. When I told my parents, they looked at me and said, "Don't be dramatic." But what hurts worse than the deletion was what came before it. How he slowly used my ideas in his meetings. How they all laughed when I tried to speak up. How I was always too sensitive to be taken seriously. They didn't just erase my work, they erased me. Now I wonder, was I ever really part of this family, or just someone they tolerated until I got in the way? If you've ever sat at a table where everyone smiled except you, then you already know what I'm about to say. It doesn't start with shouting or slamming doors. No, it's quieter than that. An interrupted sentence, a polite laugh that lands like a slap, a plate passed right over you, as if you weren't even sitting there. That's the kind of night it was. It was early spring, a Sunday evening in Tacoma, and dinner at my parents' house had become the usual monthly formality. My mother, Elowen, wore her favorite turquoise blouse and an apron with a faded "World's Best Cook" stitched across the front. My father, Gideon, stood by the fireplace, nodding along to Truett's story about property development near the waterfront. Truett, my brother-in-law, always had a way of making the mundane sound monumental. Tonight, he was holding court about flipping a 3-bedroom in Hilltop. The way he spoke, confident, full of figures and phrases like capital gain trajectory, you'd think he was narrating a documentary instead of a home renovation. Callista, my sister, beamed at him with that adoring pride she reserved only for him or herself. I sat to the left of Gideon, my chair slightly out of the main conversational arc. I stirred my mashed potatoes, waiting for the right moment to jump in. Not that there was ever one. I had spent the last 8 months building my final project for my master's degree in product design. It had consumed every evening, every weekend. But when I finally found a lull in Truett's TED Talk monologue and said, "I actually just finished something pretty major this week. My project is done and..." Callista reached across me to grab the pepper. Truett didn't pause. Neither did Dad. It was as if my words were ambient noise. I let the sentence trail off, my fork resting in mashed potatoes I no longer wanted. That was when my mother, between bites of roast chicken, glanced at me with a smile that felt more like a pat on the head. "Kaelen's always got these little dream projects," she said lightly. Before I could say anything, Truett chuckled. "Bet it's on a Google Doc called World Changer Final V2 or something, huh?" Laughter erupted. Callista, Dad, even Mom joined in. I smiled too, but it felt mechanical, like muscle memory. Underneath that smile, something inside me dimmed a little. I excused myself after dessert and wandered toward the kitchen, mostly to breathe. I leaned on the counter, gripping the edge as if I might fall. From behind me, Truett appeared, casual as ever, holding his empty wine glass. "You know," he said, "your laptop's been running pretty slow. I could take a quick look before you go tonight. Malware or something. You probably don't have good antivirus, right?" He said it with a smirk, like he was offering to help a toddler with crayons. I hesitated. The last time Truett touched my computer was years ago, when he added a budgeting spreadsheet to help me be more responsible. Still, in that house, refusing help made you difficult. Accepting it made you agreeable. And being agreeable kept the peace. "Sure," I said reluctantly. I handed him my laptop. He walked into the den, plugged in a small USB device from his keychain, and opened the console. My mom walked by at that moment and said, "He's good with those things. Thank God for Truett." I watched from the kitchen, arms crossed. Truett glanced up with a grin. "You really should back things up more often. Just saying." I nodded and pretended not to feel the prickle in my stomach. The evening wrapped up the way it always did. Callista loading leftovers, Mom pressing a Tupperware container into my hands I hadn't asked for, and Truett giving me a stiff 2-pat hug like he was closing a deal. "Let me know how the project goes," he said. "I'm sure it's adorable." No one said they were proud. No one asked to see it. Back at my apartment, the silence welcomed me like an old friend. I set down my bag, took off my coat, and sat at my desk. My laptop was still warm. I opened the main folder. Everything appeared untouched. And yet, something felt wrong. Not like a missing file, but like a scent you can't quite place. Something off in the air. One of my main folders had a new label. Old drafts. Not important. My hands stilled on the trackpad. I didn't remember naming anything like that. I opened it. Empty. I stared at the screen, my jaw clenched. I didn't move, didn't breathe for a long minute. No one else could have done that. That night, I didn't send any angry texts or storm into family group chats. I didn't scream or cry. But something changed. I sat back in my chair, stared at that renamed folder, and whispered to no one. That was the last time I ever let someone touch my work. I didn't touch the folder again that night. I just sat at my desk staring at the screen, rereading those 4 words. Old drafts. Not important. There was no point in opening the rest. My body moved on autopilot, shower, pajamas, the usual. And yet, my mind stayed tethered to that one line, like it was blinking in red across my vision. The next morning came in quietly. The house smelled like coffee and cinnamon toast. I followed the scent downstairs, keeping my expression as neutral as possible. No one suspected anything. That's how these things worked. Subtle shifts, micro damage, 1,000 paper cuts before the bleeding started. After breakfast, I went back to my room and opened the project file. It took longer than usual to load, and when it finally opened, the contents were almost unrecognizable. The visual maps I'd spent weeks designing were gone. The user pathways, the aesthetic palette references, everything that gave the concept structure, scrubbed clean. All that remained were placeholder blocks and half sentences. My throat tightened. I double-checked my backups, Dropbox, external drive, even the random folder I used for testing alternate versions. All empty or overwritten with earlier drafts that weren't complete. Panic rose in me, not like a scream, but like water rising just fast enough to drown without making a sound. I walked out of my room and found Truett standing by the fridge, stirring creamer into his coffee. I didn't bother with pleasantries. "Hey," I said, voice steady. "Do you remember looking at my laptop the other night?" He didn't look up. "Yeah, just ran a quick scan. Nothing major." My final project file's corrupted, completely gutted. He finally glanced at me, spoon tapping against the mug. "You really didn't back it up?" His tone was almost amused. "Oh no, that's rough." He took a sip and walked past me like we were discussing a dead plant. I stood there for a few seconds, not frozen, just recalibrating. That moment where your brain can't decide if what you're hearing is an oversight or an ambush. He didn't even ask what the project was. Didn't ask if I was okay. Just a casual brush-off like I'd lost a grocery list. And that's when I knew. He did it on purpose. Later that day, I approached my parents in the living room. Elawan was folding laundry, while Gideon stared at the television, half listening. I explained what happened, how my files were missing, how Truett had been the last person to touch my laptop. My mom didn't even look up from a pair of socks. "Kaelen, you're always so emotional about these things. Maybe it was just a tech glitch." Callista, from across the room, chimed in. "Truett's been under pressure lately with his firm's pitch week. Don't go blaming people because you're stressed." I blinked slowly. "You know I've been working on that file for months, right? It's not just some school assignment. It's my thesis. It's my career." My mother sighed. "We're not saying it's not important to you, sweetie, but pointing fingers never solves anything." I looked at them, my parents, my sister, and understood something I hadn't been willing to accept until now. They weren't going to defend me. Not against Truett. Not against anyone. That evening, I sat on the back porch alone. The spring air was cool, and the sun was dipping low behind the evergreens. I remembered another evening, years ago, when I'd been awarded a design prize from the local museum. It wasn't a big event, just a small gallery celebration. I asked my parents to come. They said they were too tired after a long week. Gideon had a golf thing. Elawan had dinner plans with a neighbor. At the time, I told myself they didn't realize how much it meant to me, that they were simply busy, that I should have explained better. But now, sitting on that porch with the same wooden planks under my feet and the same silence pressing in, I saw the pattern for what it was. When people ignore you long enough, you start narrating excuses for them, just to stay sane. Later that night, I sat back down at my laptop, not because I expected anything to be restored, but because I needed to know exactly how deep this went. I opened the folder that had been renamed. More than half the contents were missing. I didn't just lose data, I lost direction, flow, visual identity. I clicked through my cloud platform's activity log. There it was. A download at 2:17 a.m., the night after Truitt said he ran a quick scan. I knew who the night owl in the house was. It wasn't Elowen, it wasn't Gideon. And Callista was always in bed by 10 with her silk eye mask. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I didn't even call anyone. Instead, I took a screenshot of the activity log, then another of the empty folder. I started gathering my copies, saving everything elsewhere, password protected, offline, hidden from casual hands. I created a spreadsheet and labeled it Restoration Plan. At breakfast the next day, I sat at the table across from Truitt. He reached for the orange juice, then passed it to me with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Got a big week ahead, huh?" I took the glass, met his gaze, and said nothing. But inside I was already building something far more powerful than a final project. He doesn't think I'll do anything. That's going to be his first mistake. There's a particular kind of invisibility that doesn't come from being forgotten. It comes from being actively ignored. From being in the room, saying the words, and watching them float straight past people like smoke. I'd known that kind of silence for a long time. Being the youngest meant being the one who got the leftovers, not just of food, but of attention, of belief, of space to speak. I was taught, not in words, but in glances and shrugs, to wait my turn. The only thing was, my turn never came. That Tuesday morning, I was still trying to piece together what remained of my work when my phone buzzed beside me. Messages from my classmates lit up the screen. "Did you submit already? Can't wait to see your pitch in the review batch. You're going to crush it. Seriously." I stared at the screen. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I typed, "Still polishing it." I hit send, and then I sat back, phone on my lap, and let the wave roll over me. They were moving forward, fast, excited, optimistic. And I was holding broken pieces, pretending I still had something whole. Later that afternoon, I found my mother in the kitchen, slicing apples for a pie she was taking to a neighbor's potluck. Her movements were precise, habitual, the perfect backdrop for what I had to ask. "Mom," I said carefully, "I need to reprint some of my project visuals. The files I have are old, and I want the presentation to look clean. Could I borrow a little until I get my check next week?" She didn't look at me, just slid open the drawer, pulled out a white envelope, and handed it to me. "Of course, honey." I started to thank her, but she placed her hand on mine before I could finish. "You'll keep things quiet, right? No more of those comments. I just don't want people talking." And there it was. The price of help. Silence. Again. I nodded. What else could I do? At least this time, I noticed the terms. That night, I was folding laundry in my room when a memory came crawling back without warning. Junior year of high school. I'd spent months designing a sculpture from recycled glass, won an award at a student art show for sustainability and design. The email invitation said, "Bring your family." They didn't come. Afterward, Elowen told me, "We didn't think it was that big of a deal. And it was on a weeknight." At the time, I accepted it. I always did. I tucked their absence into my memory like a folded napkin, neat and contained. But it stuck. That pattern over and over again. If they couldn't get credit for it, they didn't care. I pulled out my laptop and dug through old Gmail threads, desperate for some anchor, some proof that I hadn't hallucinated my progress. Somewhere in that cluttered inbox, Buried between grocery store coupons and university newsletters, I found a thread from Lior. Lior, the guy who'd once read every draft of my proposal back when we were still us. There it was. PDF V4 Final, attached in a message dated nearly a year ago. His note said, "Looks really strong. Tweaked some headers but didn't touch your flow." I opened the file. There it was. Mine. Clean, intact. Before I'd done all the fancier formatting and had started second-guessing everything. Before Truett. Before deletion. Before silence. I stared at the file like it was a lifeline. My hands trembled slightly as I opened a new message window. I typed, "Hey, I know it's been a while. Do you still have the annotated version of my PDF?" I didn't expect him to reply right away. Maybe not at all. But a few minutes later, the screen lit up. "Just sent it. Never deleted your work." The attachment came through before I could even catch my breath. I clicked it, and there it was. The layout. The flow. The notes. The honesty of my idea before anyone else had gotten their hands on it. I didn't cry. I didn't cheer. I just sat still, breathing slowly. Because this was the real beginning. The glow from my laptop was the only light in the room. I sat cross-legged on the floor, the old PDF from Lior still open on the screen. For hours I hadn't moved, just stared and scrolled, read and reread, not out of shock, but to remind myself what it felt like to see my own voice, untouched. No one else's fingerprints, no subtle edits, no strategic improvements, just me. Before I tried to mold it into something other people would approve of. It wasn't just a thesis or a step toward graduation. It was the blueprint of everything I knew I could become. Purposeful, independent, articulate. I printed it in full. Page after page rolled out warm and solid into my hands, and I held it like it was something holy. The last piece of me that hadn't been diluted. The next morning, I moved around the house slowly. There was something about those quiet moments when everyone was still waking up. The way the coffee brewed, the way sunlight hit the kitchen sink. That made truths easier to notice. Or maybe I was just finally paying attention. In the kitchen, while slicing cucumbers for lunch, my Aunt Margot leaned in casually. "You know Truett showed off that client model of yours a few weeks ago, right?" she said, not looking at me, just arranging pickles on a plate. I blinked. "What?" "At the barbecue. You weren't there. He was talking about some user journey chart or whatever. Said you helped with it, like it came from a draft you were both working on." I didn't respond. I just turned off the tap and wiped my hands, staring at her like she'd just explained the weather. She popped a grape in her mouth. "Honestly, I thought it was cute he gave you a little credit." I left the kitchen. My mind spun, but my body moved calmly. Up the stairs, into my room, door closed. And then I sat down and let it land. It hadn't been a one-time deletion. It wasn't even recent. He had been laying the groundwork for this for weeks, maybe months, planting the idea that I was a helper, that he'd done the heavy lifting. Just enough to make any later claim of mine sound ungrateful or worse, delusional. I opened a new spreadsheet, labeled it Incident Log. I began cataloging every date, every timestamp, every message, every time someone had seen a piece of my project used elsewhere. Not because I needed validation, because I needed proof. I wasn't hoping anyone in this house would believe me anymore, but someone would. Later that night, I found myself rereading Lior's email. The way he'd just responded. No fanfare, no questions, no fishing for gossip or sympathy. Just, never deleted your work. The quiet of that message meant more than any long-winded apology ever could. Because sometimes, the only validation we get is someone who never tried to rewrite our story. The next morning, I sat on the back porch sipping tea. It was cloudy, but the air felt clear. And with clarity comes memory. One I hadn't revisited in years. It was the night of Callista's engagement dinner. We were at that trendy restaurant she loved downtown. Concrete walls, Edison bulbs, the kind of place that made you feel underdressed even in heels. Truett had been sitting across from me. I remember because halfway through his steak, I'd mentioned my concept idea, the early version of what would later become my final project. I'd barely gotten 2 sentences out before Callista started talking about her wedding venue. Truett? He'd just smiled. Not at me, just to himself. And I realized now, that might have been when he decided it was too good to leave in my hands. Back upstairs, I logged into my cloud drive and uploaded Lior's PDF. I added a timestamp, encrypted it, and saved a backup under a new alias. Not just to reclaim what was mine, but to protect it. For the first time, this wasn't about finishing school. This was about defending the one thing they'd never thought I'd guard. My voice. I stared at the screen. No emotion this time, just certainty. Next time he brings it up in public, I'll be ready. My phone buzzed. A message from Mom. Can we talk sometime today? I didn't respond. Instead, I walked to the printer, slid a new ream of paper into the tray, and hit print. The folder that came out, crisp and clean, was labeled Original. I tucked it gently into a protective sleeve, zipped it into a bag I'd bought just for this. If they won't protect what's mine, I will. I didn't sleep much the night before. Not because I was scared. I was organizing, printing, labeling, saving files on 3 different drives. I didn't plan to start a war, but I sure wasn't going to lose one I didn't start. Late that afternoon, the house buzzed in that strained, overly cheerful way families do when they're pretending nothing's wrong. Ilawan had set out cheese cubes and sparkling cider, like a peace offering nobody asked for. The living room had that faint citrus cleaner smell, masking tension rather than dirt. Callista found me in the kitchen while I was pouring water into the kettle. She closed the pantry door behind her like she needed privacy, even though we both knew this house had none. "Can I ask you something?" she said, voice lowered. I didn't look up. "You're going to anyway." She ignored the tone. "Please don't bring any of this up tonight. Mom's been really overwhelmed lately." I let the water settle before turning around. Maybe she should be. I'm not the one who created this mess. Her mouth opened, then closed. A flicker of something passed across her face. Not guilt, not yet. Maybe fear, maybe recognition. Dinner started with forced laughter. Truett cracked jokes no one asked for. Gideon sat at the head of the table, like a CEO, hosting a board meeting he didn't want to attend. Ilawan poured wine like it was a sacred ritual, her smile fixed and hollow. Halfway through the salad course, Elowen cleared her throat and looked directly at me. "Kaelen, about that post on your Instagram the other day." I didn't blink. "What about it?" It sounded bitter. That's not how we handle things here. Airing family business online, even vaguely. It's not kind. Not to anyone. I put my fork down gently. What about stealing? How do we handle that here? The air cracked. Silence stretched tight between us. Truett chuckled like he was saving face. "Let's not make this awkward." I looked at him, still calm. "Too late." He shifted in his seat. Callista stared at her plate. Elowen folded her napkin with more focus than necessary. "I have evidence," I said, still not raising my voice. "Timestamps, backups, emails, screenshots. You knew it was mine, Truett. You deleted it, and you've been using it for weeks." He leaned back, trying to look insulted. "That's a serious accusation." "Then you should be seriously worried." There was a beat of silence before Elowen jumped in. "Enough! We will not ruin dinner with this nonsense." That word again, nonsense. I laughed. Quiet, bitter, all edge. It's always nonsense until it happens to someone else in this family. Then suddenly it's a crisis. Gideon said nothing. Typical. His silence was its own kind of loyalty. To calm, to control, to anything but truth. Callista's hands were clenched in her lap. Not to protect me, to hold herself together. No one apologized. No one asked for clarity. The table stayed still and cold. I stood, reached for my tote bag slowly, pulled the manila folder halfway out, then slid it back in. I'll be in the guest room. If anyone wants to know the facts, ask for them. No dramatic exit, no slamming doors, just gravity. As I turned the corner into the hallway, Truitt's voice followed behind me, low enough for only me to hear. She won't do anything. She never does. I didn't turn around, didn't respond, but in my chest, something snapped into place. They still think I'm the girl who needs permission to matter. It was a Thursday morning, unusually quiet. Everyone else was out. Callista had taken Mom to a wellness class, and Truitt was at some networking brunch. I sat in the dining room, the one spot in this house where the light didn't feel like it belonged to someone else. It was just me, a cup of lukewarm coffee, and my laptop. The message came through Facebook Messenger of all places. The sender was Alina Carter, someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year, not since we'd taken that last seminar together. Her message read, "Hey, just curious. Isn't this your pitch? Truitt's name is all over it in the Pacific Startup Summit teaser." Attached was a link. My heart didn't even race. That would have meant I was shocked. Instead, it settled, like a stone dropping through water. I clicked the video. It was a sleek 90-second teaser. Smooth transitions, warm voiceover, corporate music humming beneath. But the minute the slides appeared, I knew. Not inspired by, not similar to, mine. The opening framework mirrored the one I'd created in Lior's draft. The color schemes, the language, the client behavior map I'd built from scratch. It wasn't just stolen, it was paraded. And then I saw it, slide 7, the hand-drawn sketch from my notebook. Cropped, cleaned up, but unmistakable. I had pinned that sketch on my bedroom wall during the second month of research. It was a visual representation of customer empathy mapping, an original approach I'd developed myself. It even had the same asymmetry in the corner, where I'd accidentally dragged my sleeve through the ink. They didn't just erase me, I whispered aloud. They enlarged my work under someone else's name. It was infuriating in its elegance. I mean, who would question Truitt? He had the vocabulary, the connections, the smile that always tilted just enough to pass as confident but not arrogant. The kind of man people took seriously even when he had nothing real to say. I moved without emotion, no adrenaline, just instruction. First, I saved the video offline. Then I took screenshots of every slide that mirrored my material. I reopened the time-stamped files from Lior and matched the designs, side by side, layer by layer. I printed them all. I slipped on a hoodie and drove to the nearest FedEx print and ship. Nobody made eye contact. I scanned every sheet, uploaded encrypted backups, and created a folder on my hard drive named Proof of Origin Do Not Touch. This wasn't a meltdown. This was a case. I walked back in the house just before lunch. No one was home yet. I spread the documents across the table, one after another. The silence made it easy to think clearly. For once, silence worked in my favor. On my screen, the final file glowed. Lior's annotated version. His original subject line still made me smile. "Don't let them water this down." I included that in the packet too. Then I opened a new folder labeled Marlowe Submission True Author. I felt like I was building something again. Not a project, a foundation. Callista came home first. She walked in through the side door, groceries in one hand, phone tucked between shoulder and cheek. She paused when she saw the table. "What's all this?" she asked, setting the bag down. I didn't turn from the screen. "Back up." She moved closer. "Is that Truitt's summit clip?" I finally looked at her. "You're really asking me that?" Her mouth opened, then closed. "You're really going through with this?" I nodded slowly. "What happens next is on him. I'm done hiding." She didn't argue, didn't apologize. She just stared at the stack of paper, then turned and walked out of the room. And me? I leaned forward, clicked export, and watched the bar crawl to 100%. 3 days had passed, but the tension in the house still clung to the walls like humidity. Everything felt too quiet, too careful. Even the clocks ticked slower, like they were waiting for something to crack. I sat at the edge of my bed, the manila folder open in front of me. Each document had been cross-checked, relabeled, and scanned into 2 separate drives. The PDF Lior sent, the video screenshots, the original drafts, the comparison slide deck. I had compiled it all, with digital timestamps, print backups, and a copy stored off-site. Before zipping the folder back up, I emailed myself a backup with the subject line, "In case they try again." This wasn't fear. It was documentation. They called it a family dinner, a way to ease the tension, according to Elowen, which meant a trap disguised as reconciliation. Before heading downstairs, I clicked Record on the voice memo app on my phone and slid it into the front pocket of my cardigan. Then I checked the envelope one more time, tucked it into my bag, and went to the kitchen where the scent of garlic bread and roasted vegetables made everything feel too warm, too staged. Callista was already there, placing forks beside the plates. She looked up as I entered, eyes guarded. "You really bringing all that tonight?" she asked, gesturing at my bag. I kept my voice even. "Bringing what?" She dropped her tone. "Don't escalate. Mom doesn't need more stress right now." I poured myself water, then leaned back against the counter. Maybe she should have been stressed earlier when all of this started. Her jaw clenched. "You're the one hurting her." I didn't flinch. "No, I'm the one finally naming what's been ignored." She didn't answer, just went back to the forks. Before the guests arrived, I got a call from Avon. I stepped out onto the back patio to answer. "You good?" she asked. No pleasantries. "Define good," I said. "I saw the summit video. I know it was yours. Why aren't you calling him out publicly?" I rubbed the bridge of my nose. "Because if I yell, I become ungrateful or dramatic. But if I wait, if I gather, he reveals himself." "Damn, Kaelen," she said. "You're not passive." "No," I said quietly. "I'm patient." Dinner began with Truett holding court again, cracking jokes that no one truly laughed at. Gideon raised his glass with a flat smile. "To moving forward," he said, "as a family." I smiled, just enough to be polite. Forward to where? The silence after that was the kind that made forks pause mid-air. Between the salad and the entree, I pulled the folder from my bag and placed it on the table. I didn't explain. I didn't offer disclaimers. Everyone looked at it. No one dared reach. "Just in case anyone here forgets the facts," I said calmly. "I printed some." Callista shifted in her chair. Elowen's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. Truett tried to play it cool, but his nostrils flared. No one touched the folder. That night, after I finished helping clear the table, because of course I still did, Truett knocked on my bedroom door. He stepped in without waiting for me to answer. "You trying to start a legal fight?" he asked, arms crossed. I looked up from my laptop, voice steady. "Only if you keep pretending you're the victim." His lips pressed together. He turned and walked out without saying another word. I reopened my laptop, renamed the project folder, Confidential, Timeline of Misuse. Then I added a note at the bottom of the document. They thought I was gathering pity. I was gathering proof. I arrived 35 minutes late, deliberately. The backyard was already half filled with folding chairs, chit-chat, and the clinking of iced tea glasses. The air smelled like coleslaw, grilled corn, and strained diplomacy. I walked in holding a large envelope labeled Supporting Materials, Marlowe Innovation Pitch. I made sure it was visible, but not flaunted. Just present, like the truth itself. Everyone looked up when I passed through the gate. Polite smiles, awkward hugs. Gideon offered a shallow, "Glad you made it." Elowen patted my back like I was 10. Callista handed me a lemonade that I didn't ask for. Truett didn't even pretend to greet me, just watched from under his sunglasses like a man who hoped I'd walk straight into a trap he'd forgotten to disarm. They think I'm here to play nice. They always underestimate the quiet ones. Earlier that morning, I had sent an email to the pitch committee and two of my former professors. Subject: clarification on intellectual property concerns. It included everything: time-stamped PDFs, Lior's annotated copy, cloud logs, screenshots from the Pacific Summit teaser, even the metadata from the slide Truitt had claimed as his creative concept. I scheduled it to go out at 11 a.m. sharp, right when the grill was being lit. By 1 p.m., the email had already been opened 5 times. It didn't take long for the universe to send backup. Mid-party, I was standing near the lemonade table when a voice tugged at my awareness. A little girl, maybe 7, ponytail, missing front teeth, looked up at me. "I saw your diagram on YouTube," she said brightly. "Mr. Truitt said it was his." I froze, not out of shock, out of recognition. This is how truth leaks, never in a headline, always through the mouths of those who haven't learned to lie yet. Every conversation around us paused. A few relatives turned to listen. Callista went pale. Truitt coughed, tried to chuckle. "She must have misunderstood," he said, eyes darting. "Kids see a lot of things online." I didn't respond. I just looked at him, and silence fell harder than anything I could have said. Later, Gideon called everyone in for cake. "Let's not let the day get away from us," he said, tone too cheerful. The tension hovered like smoke. Callista leaned toward me as we lined up for plates. Her voice was tight. "Are you really going to do this today?" I met her eyes. "Today's perfect. I'm not the one who started this." The birthday song was mumbled, off-key. Someone forgot the candles. By late afternoon, I slipped inside to sit in the living room and check my phone. I hadn't posted anything publicly yet, but I didn't need to. Truitt's summit clip had made its way to LinkedIn and Twitter. People were praising the clarity, the originality, the articulation of brand empathy. What they didn't know was that every word, every phrase, was lifted straight from my early executive summary. I scrolled through the thread. One comment caught my eye. "This keynote changed how I think about user behavior. Brilliant framing." I clicked reply. "Interesting. I wrote those lines 2 years ago. Have the drafts to prove it." I didn't tag Truitt. Didn't need to. It took less than 10 minutes before people started reacting. Likes, retweets, DMs. He had the mic, but I had the receipts. The buzz in my hand jolted me from the moment. A new email from Marlowe Partners. "We've received your file. We'd like to speak with you directly." That was it. Simple, straightforward. The kind of message people like Truitt pretend they never see coming. As I walked back outside, the party had thinned. The air smelled like reheated sausages and dwindling interest. Truitt stood by the punch bowl, alone. I stepped beside him, leaned just close enough to be heard. "You had the mic," I said quietly. "I have the receipts." I walked away without waiting for a reaction. 2 days had passed since the backyard lunch, and the house had gone unusually quiet. No one asked how I was feeling. No one brought up the little girl's YouTube comment. Truitt disappeared into long phone calls in the den. Callista made a point of speaking only when she absolutely had to. Elowen moved through the house like a hostess during a wake. Graceful, distant, performative. Upstairs, in my childhood bedroom, the sun spilled across my desk while I refreshed my inbox for the 3rd time that hour. And then it came. My comment under Truitt's summit keynote had gone viral. What started as a reply, simple, almost polite. "Interesting. I wrote those lines 2 years ago. Have the drafts to prove it," was now being reshared with tags like Chiaka credit the creator and pitch theft. Supportive emails rolled in. Old classmates, a former professor, even a stranger from Chicago who worked in legal compliance and said my post hit too close to home. I hadn't asked to go public, but they made it public the moment they tried to erase me. Then the dam burst. Truitt's inbox flooded. One of his business partners pulled out of a venture he'd just announced on LinkedIn. A startup blog, known for its sharp takes, posted a side-by-side of my original document and his summit slide deck. The headline read, "Too similar to ignore?" Around noon, my phone buzzed with a voicemail. I recognized his voice immediately. "Kaelen, this is getting out of control. Call me back, please." He didn't sound angry. He sounded afraid. I didn't respond. Downstairs, I overheard lunch being prepared. I wasn't hungry, but I wandered down for water. Margot, my aunt, was there with Elowen and Callista, arranging the table. "She's talented," Margot was saying. "But honestly, Kaelen's always rubbed people the wrong way. You know what I mean?" Callista said nothing. Elowen gave the smallest nod. "She just doesn't know when to stop." They hadn't heard me come in. I didn't wait for them to see me. I walked out, glass in hand, and let the words settle like dust. I didn't cry. That night, Elowen called for a family meeting. The phrasing alone made me want to laugh. We gathered in the living room. Gideon sat in his recliner, Truett perched stiffly on the edge of the couch, arms crossed. Elowen began, "I think we need to talk about what Kaelen's actions have caused." I didn't flinch. Instead, I stood, walked to my tote, and placed the folder back on the coffee table. "I didn't cause anything," I said. "I uncovered everything." The silence was immediate. Gideon cleared his throat. "Maybe we should have listened to her earlier." Callista stood up and walked out without a word. No one followed her. Truett sent a statement later that night to the summit organizers. A bland, polished email that read, "I was inspired by an early family idea. It evolved from a shared space of collaboration." I read it out loud, then looked at Elowen. Not stolen, not attributed, just inspired. I shook my head slowly. "You still can't say my name out loud when it matters." And yet, outside of this house, people had begun saying it. Loudly. Another email came through just after midnight. "We're reviewing your full submission for direct credit. We'll be in touch within 48 hours. I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes. Let the words echo. Maybe the quiet girl at the table had the loudest voice all along. The morning light in Tacoma was sharper than usual, as if even the sun had something to say. I sat by the kitchen window, watching a sparrow hop along the fence line while my phone buzzed again. Another notification. Another email. This one read, "Your file was among the best we've seen. Why didn't you present it yourself?" The pitch committee. I stared at the screen for a moment before replying, slowly, deliberately, because I was raised to believe staying quiet was safer. And then I hit send. That reply didn't come from bitterness. It came from clarity. I wasn't hiding anymore. Not behind politeness. Not behind deference. Not behind the myth that family always knows best. The consequences began unfolding fast. Within hours, one of Truett's clients publicly withdrew their partnership, citing ethical concerns. Another firm posted a brief but scathing update. "We do not work with professionals who take credit for others' intellectual property." Online forums had a field day with side-by-side images comparing my original executive summary and Truett's polished, plagiarized version. The more they matched, the louder the conversation grew. Truett stayed quiet. That afternoon, my phone rang with an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, then played it back on speaker. A man's voice, composed but earnest. "Hi, Kaelen. This is Martin Douglas from the board. We've reviewed everything. We'd like you to present your version at the Innovation Summit, under your name. Are you ready?" I stared at my reflection in the window for a long time before replying. When I finally picked up the phone and said, "Yes," my voice didn't crack like I thought it might. It just felt final. Elowen passed me in the hallway later that day, eyes down. She didn't speak, just walked by, holding folded towels like they were armor. Callista wasn't even around. She'd moved in with a friend for space. I suspected it was more about avoiding headlines than emotional overwhelm. Gideon, to his credit, approached me near the garage. Said nothing, just held out a plain envelope. Inside was a photo. Me, age 12, sitting on the floor with poster board, sketching wireframes with markers. My name was written in bold letters at the bottom. That version of me had believed being good was enough. I looked up at my father. He didn't say anything, just nodded once and walked back inside. The next morning, I began packing for Seattle. I folded my clothes neatly, tucked the printed copies into a hardback folder, labeled everything. I wasn't just preparing to present a pitch. I was reclaiming my own timeline. I zipped the suitcase shut. Sometimes home is just a place where people remember your quietest version. But I had outgrown that silence. At the station, I found a window seat and placed the folder beside me. The train hummed beneath my feet, and for the first time in a long time, the motion didn't feel like running. It felt like arrival. As we rolled out of Tacoma, my phone buzzed again. A message from Professor Cantor. "I owe you an apology. I didn't see what was in front of me," I typed back. "That makes two of us, but I see it now." I looked out the window, the sky stretching wide in front of me. I wasn't invisible, they just weren't looking hard enough. The mornings in Seattle were colder than I remembered. Even in spring, the air carried a kind of sharpness, the kind that didn't ask for permission before waking you fully. I sat on the edge of the bed in my small rented apartment, my bare feet pressing against the cool wood floor. Light poured in through the half-open blinds. Quiet, still. Mine. I used to think healing would feel like fireworks, some great cinematic moment of realization or forgiveness. Instead, it was the quiet. A kitchen without anyone asking why I was so quiet. A morning where I didn't have to defend how I poured my coffee. A space where I wasn't expected to be small to keep the room comfortable. My phone buzzed. It was from Elowen. "We should talk before you go on stage. I think we all misunderstood." I stared at it for a long time. Typed a reply. Deleted it. Wrote another. Deleted that too. Finally, I sent just one sentence. "Thank you, but I've already said everything I needed, with my work." No response. I didn't need one. For most of my life, silence felt like punishment. Something handed down to me when I spoke out of turn, when I questioned too much. But now, silence felt like choice, like power. It was peace, not exile. I hadn't heard from Callista. Gideon had sent a message the day I arrived. "Good luck tomorrow, I'm proud of you." No punctuation. But still, it felt like something. I didn't hate them. That would have required too much energy. I just didn't wait on them anymore. At the dining table, I pulled out my laptop and opened the keynote. I rehearsed softly, my voice steady, my gestures tight and intentional. Not rehearsed to be perfect, just to be clear. "I'm not a prodigy," I said out loud to the empty apartment. "I'm just someone who refused to be erased." The words landed in the room like truth, not declaration. In the background of my thoughts, I could still hear past versions of my family. "It's not a real job. You're too sensitive. Why can't you just let things go?" I muted them, literally. I hit play on a quiet lo-fi playlist and went back to adjusting slide transitions. "Your voice is always valid," I said aloud again, this time slower, letting it sink in, even if they never clap. By late afternoon, I stepped outside for air. The city buzzed in its usual chaos. Delivery trucks, distant car horns, someone playing saxophone near Pike Place. I wrapped my fingers around the paper cup of coffee I hadn't finished, letting its warmth root me. As I walked, I passed a billboard downtown that still carried Truett's old slogan. Half-torn, fading, a new ad being plastered over it in wide white sheets. That's the thing about stolen things. They never last. That evening, back in my apartment, I laid out my outfit for the next day on the back of the armchair. Slacks, soft gray blouse, flat shoes, no sparkle, just clarity. Then I opened the small envelope Gideon had slipped me. The photo was faded but intact. Me at 12, sitting cross-legged on the floor, sketching on poster board like the world was already listening. I placed the photo in a simple frame and set it next to my laptop. That girl thought the world would notice if she was good enough. I wasn't walking into that room to prove anything. I was walking in because it was mine now. The air inside the Marlowe Innovation venue buzzed with quiet movement, soft clicks of heels, distant hum of conversation, the rustle of presentation folders being opened and closed with the rhythm of anticipation. I stood near the registration table, watching younger professionals exchange eager handshakes and inside jokes, their lanyards swinging with every laugh. But this time, I didn't feel like I was standing at the edge of the room hoping for entry. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. This time, I didn't shrink to fit the room. The room adjusted to fit me. The assistant in a sharp black dress approached with a clipboard. "Kaelen Winfrey?" I nodded. "You're closing the event," she said. "Last speaker, full spotlight. The board felt your story deserved it." She handed me the updated agenda. I scanned the names. Truitt's wasn't there. No panel, no workshop, nothing. Blacklisted. Quietly, decisively. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I just slipped the agenda into my bag and kept walking. A few days earlier, my attorney had sent a formal takedown letter to the original summit organizers that had promoted Truitt's pitch without verification. They responded faster than we expected. "We regret unintentionally promoting content that belonged to another creator," their statement read. They removed his video, replaced it with mine, same framework, same visuals, but with one crucial difference: my name. The doors to the auditorium opened slowly as the final speaker before me finished. I stepped into the green room backstage, where my slides had already been loaded onto the tech monitor. Someone offered to introduce me on stage. I declined. No one needed to say my name for me this time, because it was already on the screen. When the lights dimmed and the stage light hit center, I walked out steady. No notes, no script, just truth. My name is Kaelen Winfrey. I'm not a prodigy. I'm not a viral speaker. I'm someone who refused to be erased. A pause. The room leaned in. You don't need to be loud to be right. You just need to last long enough for the noise to fall away. I guided them through the framework, empathy mapping, user pathways, the value of human context in tech solutions. My voice didn't waver once. By the time I finished, the room was still. Then one person stood, then another, then all of them. A standing ovation doesn't always feel like glory. Sometimes it feels like stillness finally being heard. Backstage, I set my mic down and reached for my phone. A message from Elowen blinked on the screen. "We watched the stream. Your father is proud." I stared at it a second too long, then typed back. "I am too. For the first time, that's enough." Right beneath it sat a draft text from Callista. I didn't open it. Outside, the Seattle sky had softened into late evening. I stood on the curb, shoulders relaxed, breath steady. A reporter approached, notebook in hand. "That was stunning," she said. "What's next for you?" I smiled. "Building a space where women don't have to defend authorship, they just create." And then I walked away, the applause still ringing in my ears, not chasing approval, not collecting apologies. I wasn't looking for a seat at their table. I was building my own.